All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We're diving into something, pretty interesting today, I think. We're going to be talking about silver IRAs.
Okay.
So if you're out there and you're thinking about, okay, I've got my, 401k, maybe you've got a Roth IRA, some of the usual retirement
Dead
vehicles,
standard stuff.
you might be thinking, hey, what else is out there?
Right.
And, we've been digging into this article. It's called Top Reasons to Invest in Silver IRA and Benefits, written by Doug Young.
Yeah, Doug Young.
And we're going to be looking at, what are the real, advantages? Are there any downsides? Are there considerations to a silver IRA?
Sure.
And just to get started, one of the things that I find interesting about this whole concept is just the idea that you can actually hold the asset.
Yeah.
It's something that you can actually physically have.
It's funny, because I think about this a lot because we're so, we're in this digital world.
Yeah.
We see numbers on a screen, but, to actually be able to hold something, like a silver coin or a silver bar,
Yeah.
it does give you a different feeling of security.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that bedrock, feeling.
Right.
And, one of the things that the article talks about that I think is really important is that, with a stock, for example, a company can go under.
Right.
And that stock can be worthless.
Worthless, gone.
Oof.
Poof. Happens all the time.
But with silver, it's like there's always going to be a value to that silver because there's always a demand for it.
Right. It has that intrinsic value just because of what it is.
Right. And they were talking about, all the different uses, industrially, in jewelry, even in the medical field, silver is used.
Electronics. I mean, it's in everything.
Yeah. So there's just this, constant underlying demand for it.
Right.
That gives it a baseline.
And it's a real thing. It's not just, numbers on a computer.
Yeah.
It's a physical thing that has real world application that you can hold.
Okay. So another big topic that we need to dig into here, Doug Young talks about this a lot. It's this whole idea of silver as a hedge against inflation.
Inflation hedge.
As silent wealth killer.
Silent wealth killer.
Exactly.
Can you explain that a little bit? What is it about silver that makes it a good hedge against inflation?
Well, inflation is essentially, the decreasing value of your dollars over time.
Okay.
A dollar today is not worth the same thing as a dollar was 20 years ago. And so what precious metals like silver have done is that they've historically moved in the opposite direction of paper money during inflationary periods.
Okay.
When the value of your currency decreases, something with intrinsic worth like silver becomes more valuable in comparison. They move kind of inverse to each other.
I see.
You see your currency going down, but silver's going up.
Okay.
It's a good hedge.
Yeah, against that.
Okay, so the article gives this great example.
Okay.
And they say, okay, so let's say inflation is running at 3%.
3% a year.
3% a year.
Yeah.
So your money that you have in cash is losing 3% of its buying power every single year.
Exactly. And that's a huge problem a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah.
Inflation is sneaky.
It's a silent killer. That's what they call it.
A silent killer.
But they said, okay, well, during that same period, let's say silver goes up by 5%.
Oh, okay.
So you're not only keeping pace with inflation, you're actually getting ahead.
You're actually making money.
So, I mean,
it's a great way to protect your wealth.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty good.
And it's not just about protecting wealth. I think that's an important point.
Yeah.
It's about actually potentially growing your wealth.
Okay.
Because we've seen times when precious metals have outpaced inflation.
Yeah.
By a significant margin. Think about the 1970s. You had a really inflationary period.
Yeah.
Silver did very, very well during that time.
Okay. So, let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about just a core principle of investing.
Okay.
And that's diversification.
Diversification.
So how does a silver IRA fit into that whole concept of spreading your investments around to, reduce risk?
Well, diversification is kind of like, imagine your portfolios like a table.
Okay.
And all the legs are made out of the same material.
Okay.
So let's say it's all stocks and bonds.
Right.
If that material weakens, the whole table could collapse.
Right.
So with diversification, you want to have different materials for your table legs.
Gotcha.
So you want to have stocks, you want to have bonds, you might want to have real estate, and you might want to have precious metals like silver.
Okay.
Because silver often moves inversely to the stock market.
So it's kind of like that seesaw effect.
Yeah, it's like a seesaw.
When the market goes down,
Silver goes up.
silver might go up. So it kind of provides that
It gives you that balance
balance
to your portfolio.
Yeah.
And it helps to cushion
Yeah.
against those big swings that you can see in the market.
So especially for people who are heavily invested in stocks
Yeah. Or bonds.
or bonds, this could really be a good way to
Diversify and balance out that portfolio.
you kind of give yourself that extra protection.
Yeah, to kind of give yourself a little bit of a cushion.
A cushion.
Against those market swings.
Okay, great. Let's talk about taxes.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to know about the tax advantages.
Oh, yeah.
So the article talks about how silver IRAs offer similar tax advantages to traditional and Roth IRAs.
Right.
So can you walk us through what the differences are and what the benefits are of each?
Sure. So with a traditional silver IRA,
Yeah.
you contribute pre-tax dollars.
Okay.
And the advantage there is that those contributions could be tax deductible,
Okay.
which would lower your taxable income. So that's a great benefit. But the trade-off is that when you withdraw the money in retirement,
Yeah.
you'll be taxed on it as income.
Okay, so you're basically kicking the can down the road.
You're deferring your taxes
Deferring your taxes.
until later.
Okay.
But it makes sense for people who think they'll be in a lower tax bracket in retirement.
Okay, so if you think you're going to be making less money when you're retired,
Yeah.
then it might make sense to go ahead and pay the taxes later.
Pay the taxes later.
The article gives an example. If you're contributing, say, $7,000 a year,
It's $7,000 a year.
and that's tax deductible,
Right.
that could be some pretty significant tax savings.
It could be, depending on your tax bracket, obviously.
Right, right.
But yeah, it's a significant amount of money that you could be saving.
Yeah, and then you could, reinvest that money or whatever.
Exactly.
Okay. So then the flip side of that is the Roth Silver IRA,
The Roth. Yeah.
and that's where the tax treatment's reversed.
Exactly. So with the Roth, you contribute money that you've already paid taxes on.
Okay.
It's post-tax income. But the big advantage there is that your investments grow tax-free.
Okay.
And when you withdraw them in retirement,
Yeah.
you don't pay any taxes.
Okay.
So it's all tax-free.
So if you think you're going to be in a higher tax bracket in retirement.
Yeah, if you think you're going to be making more money, then the Roth makes more sense.
That makes more sense.
Because you're paying the taxes now while you're in that lower bracket.
Right.
And then you're getting all that growth tax-free.
Okay, so it's a decision you have to make based on whether you think you're going to be making more money.
More money later or more money now?
Later or now.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the industrial applications.
Okay.
Because silver is not just a pretty metal,
It's not just something to look at.
it actually has
It's used in all sorts of things.
real industrial uses.
Real world uses.
So what are some of those?
Well, I mean, you think about, the electronics we use every day. Yeah.
Silver's in there,
Yeah.
solar panels,
Yeah.
medical devices.
Mm-hmm.
It's a critical component in so many different industries.
And the technology is just, advancing so rapidly.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's only going to use more silver,
Yeah, the demand's only going up.
They talk about electric vehicles.
The electric vehicles.
How much silver is going into, these new types of...
Way more than a regular car.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Electric vehicles use a ton of silver.
Huh. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, because of the batteries and all the electronics.
So, yeah. So, I mean, if that's the case, then it seems like the demand is only going to increase.
Exactly. And that's a good thing for investors.
And that should drive the price up.
It should.
Okay. So that's good news.
Potentially.
Potentially. Yeah, yeah.
We always have to say potentially right.
Right. Of course. So the article also has a link to a video that talks about some of the new technological developments.
Yeah, I saw that. That was a good video. Yeah. And how they're impacting silver prices.
It really highlights the point that silver is not just, a shiny thing to look at. It's actually being used in the real world.
Yeah. It's got practical application.
Real practical applications, and that's driving demand.
Okay, so we've looked at the good stuff.
The good stuff.
The upside.
The upsides.
But, like with any investment, there's also potential downsides.
Of course. There's always risks.
So what are some of those considerations that people need to be thinking about?
Well, I mean, the first one that the article mentions is volatility.
Volatility.
Silver prices can fluctuate.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
And that can be a little scary for some people.
It can be. It's not for the faint of heart.
So what are some of the things that can cause those fluctuations?
I mean, a lot of things. Market sentiment, if people are feeling bullish or bearish on silver.
Yeah.
Industrial demand. If demand goes up, prices go up.
Uh-huh.
Geopolitical events,
Mhm.
wars and things like that can affect silver prices. So that there's a lot of different factors that can move the needle.
So you're saying you shouldn't put all your eggs in the silver basket.
Exactly. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Diversify.
Diversify. That's the key to investing.
And the article mentions that, beyond just the price of silver itself,
Right.
there's also the bigger market volatility,
Yeah.
you know,
Right. The economy as a whole.
the economy as a whole.
If we go into a recession,
Right.
that's going to affect silver prices.
So, even though it's a hedge against inflation,
Right.
it's still subject to those,
To the overall market
to
forces.
the overall market conditions.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about something that might seem a little bit daunting to some people,
Okay.
and that's the IRS rules and regulations,
The IRS. Everybody's favorite.
and compliance.
Yeah.
And potential penalties,
Right.
because it's a retirement account.
Right.
So there's certain rules that you have to follow.
Yes. Uncle Sam wants his cut.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that people need to be aware of?
Well, the biggest one is the type and purity of silver
Okay.
that you can hold in these accounts.
Uh-huh.
The IRS is very specific about that.
So I can't just go to a pawn
Oh,
shop
no.
and buy some
You
silver.
can't just go to a coin shop and buy any old silver coin.
Right.
It has to meet certain standards.
Oh, okay. So what are those standards?
Well, typically it has to be 99.9% pure,
Okay.
which is often called fine silver.
Okay.
So, you have to make sure that the silver you're buying
Uh-huh.
meets those IRS requirements.
And if it doesn't, what happens?
Well, you could face penalties.
Okay.
You could have to pay taxes on early withdrawals.
Mm-hmm.
You could even have your entire IRA disqualified.
Oh, wow. Okay. So
It's important to work with a reputable custodian.
a custodian.
Yeah, well,
What's a custodian?
a custodian is basically a financial institution
Okay.
that specializes in holding these types of assets. And they'll make sure that you're in compliance with all the IRS rules.
So they're kind of like the middleman
They're the middleman between you and the IRS,
between you and the IRS.
and then they'll make sure that everything's done correctly.
Okay, that makes sense. Another thing that the article mentions is the cost of storage and insurance.
Yeah.
Because it's physical silver.
Physical silver.
Got to keep it somewhere.
It's got to go somewhere safe.
Right,
You got to keep it in a vault.
right.
Got to insure it.
So those are additional costs
Those are additional costs that you have to factor in.
that you have to factor into your return.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's not just the cost of the silver itself.
Yeah.
It's the cost of storing it and insuring it.
So that can eat into your profits.
It can. It's a cost of doing business.
Okay. And then the last thing I think that we need to touch on is the liquidity.
Liquidity.
The article talks about how selling physical silver
Yeah.
might not be as easy
It's not as easy as selling stocks.
as selling stocks or bonds.
Yeah. Because you have to find a buyer.
Uh-huh.
You have to make sure that the silver is authentic.
Yeah?
You have to make sure it's the right purity.
Right, right.
It's a little bit more complicated.
So it takes more time and effort.
It can. It can take more
That-
time and effort.
They did give a solution for that.
They did.
What was that?
They said you should work with a company that has a buyback program.
Okay. So that can help to simplify things
It can. It can make it a lot easier.
if you need to sell your silver.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So the article has this really helpful section at the end
Yeah.
where they answer some frequently asked questions.
Yeah, I thought that was a good section.
Yeah, so I think it would be good to kind of go through those and just,
Yeah, let's hit some of the highlights.
hit some of the highlights.
Yeah.
So the first one is, how is the value of silver determined?
Well, it's determined by supply and demand,
Okay.
just like anything else.
Just like anything else.
But there's a lot of factors that go into that.
Industrial usage,
Yeah.
investor sentiment,
Yeah.
geopolitical events, the trading activity on commodity exchanges.
Okay.
All of those things can affect the price of silver.
Okay. And then another question that they answer is, can I transfer funds from an existing IRA into a silver IRA?
Yes, you can. You can do what's called a rollover or a transfer.
Okay.
And that allows you to move funds from your current retirement accounts
Uh-huh.
into a silver IRA without triggering any taxes.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, you don't have to pay taxes just to move the money.
Right.
But it's important to work with a silver IRA company
Uh-huh.
and a custodian
Right.
to make sure that everything's done correctly.
Okay. So you need professional help.
You need professional help. Don't try to do this yourself.
Okay. Good advice. Then they talk about the specific types of silver bullion that are allowed.
Yeah.
What are those?
So the IRS has these purity requirements.
Yeah.
Typically, it has to be 99.9%
Oh,
pure.
yeah. And some popular examples are American silver eagles,
Yeah.
Canadian silver maple leafs,
Uh-huh.
silver bars from accredited refiners.
Okay.
So there are a lot of different options out there, but you just have to make sure that they meet the IRS standards.
Right. Okay. Then they have a question. Can I hold other precious metals besides silver in a silver IRA?
You can. So the name Silver IRA is kind of misleading
Yeah.
because you can actually hold other precious metals as well. You
Okay.
can hold gold, you can hold platinum, you can hold palladium.
Oh, okay, so you can have a mixed bag
You can have a diversified precious metals portfolio
within that IRA.
within that IRA.
Okay, that's good to know. Then they talk about early withdrawals.
Early withdrawals, yeah.
Are there penalties for taking money out
Yes, there are.
before retirement age?
Just like with a regular IRA.
Okay.
If you take money out before you're 59 and a half, you're going to pay a 10% penalty.
Okay.
Plus, you're going to have to pay taxes on the money. So it's not a good idea to take money out early.
But there are some exceptions, right?
There are some exceptions, like for a first-time home purchase or
Right.
for certain medical expenses.
Oh.
So there are some reasons why you might be able to take money out early without penalty.
Okay, so you need to know the rules.
Know the rules.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last question that they answer is, what's the difference between a silver IRA and a gold IRA?
Well, the obvious difference is the metal.
Yeah.
One holds silver, one holds gold.
Right.
But they both offer similar tax benefits.
Okay.
And they both provide diversification.
Uh-huh.
But the market dynamics are different.
Okay.
Silver and gold, they tend to move in the same direction.
Yeah.
But they don't always move in the same way.
Right.
So you have to decide which one is right for you based on your investment goals
Right.
and your risk tolerance.
Okay, so to kind of sum it all up,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways from this article?
So I think the main takeaway is that silver IRAs can be a great way
To diversify your portfolio and hedge against inflation.
Okay.
They offer tax benefits.
Yeah.
And they give you exposure to a tangible asset
Right.
that has real-world applications.
Okay.
But you have to be aware of the risks.
Yeah.
The volatility, the IRS rules,
The storage costs.
storage costs,
Yeah.
liquidity issues. So, it's not a slam dunk.
Right.
It's something that you have to carefully consider
Right.
and do your research on.
And I think, one thing to keep in mind is that Doug Young, who wrote this article,
Yeah.
he's got over 20 years of experience
He's been around the block.
in the financial market.
Yeah.
So he's not just some guy, who just started investing yesterday.
Right. He's got a lot of credibility.
Yeah. So I think, that lends some credibility to the information that he's providing.
Absolutely.
So, as you're out there listening,
Yeah.
thinking about your financial future.
Thinking about all the different options that are available.
Yeah.
We just want to leave you with this thought, given all of the economic uncertainty
The uncertainty in the world right now.
and, the rapid changes in technology,
Right.
how might the long-term value of something like silver,
Something tangible.
a tangible asset,
Right.
how might that fit into your financial plan?
It's a question worth asking.
It's a question worth asking.
It's something to think about.
And that's what we do here on The Deep Dive.
Yeah.
We get you thinking.
Get you thinking.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.